I think the weakest defense of Griffith is that he did nothing wrong. Not only because it sounds ridiculous, but because the manga does not leave room for it. Griffith sacrificed the Band of the Hawk. After becoming Femto, he assaulted Casca while Guts was restrained and forced to watch. Those events happened. Understanding Griffith can't require pretending they didn't. But I also think the hatred surrounding him has become so intense that people sometimes flatten him into something less complicated than what the creator actually wrote. The conversation usually gets trapped between two extremes. One side says causality controlled everything, so Griffith was basically a victim of destiny. The other side says he was always an emotionless psychopath who never cared about the Hawks at all. Then you hear smaller versions of those arguments. Femto is not Griffith. The Hawks had already agreed to die for his dream. Falconia proves the result was worth it. I don't think any of those explanations survive the manga completely. The strongest argument for Griffith is not that he was innocent. It is that understanding why he made the sacrifice is different from pretending the sacrifice was made for him. And that distinction matters because Griffith is not frightening only because of what he became. He is frightening because of how recognizably human he was before becoming it. The creator spoke about how important friendship was to him and connected the emotional foundation of the Band of Hawk to relationships from his younger years. That helps explain why Griffith affects people differently from a distant monster like an apostle, who appears for one arc, commits something horrible, and then disappears. Griffith feels like someone the audience trusted. We watched the Hawks eat together, fight together, argue, joke, and imagine a future built around the same dream. Then the person at the center of that dream offered them to monsters. The scale is horrifying. The intimacy is what makes it unforgivable. But when people talk about the eclipse, they sometimes describe it as if Griffith calmly planned every detail from the beginning. That is not what the manga shows. By the time the Hawks rescue him, Griffith has survived a year of torture. His tongue has been mutilated, his tendons have been cut, the body through which he pursued his dream has been deliberately destroyed. He cannot fight, he cannot command, and he can barely communicate. Then he hears Guts and Casca discussing what his future might require from them. He understands that the people he once led may now have to spend their lives caring for him. That matters because Griffith's entire identity had been built around movement. He was the person walking toward the castle. Everyone else followed because he appeared certain that he could reach it. Now he can't even hold a sword. So he escapes in the wagon, it crashes, he attempts to end it all and fails. Then the crimson egg returns to him. His blood activates it, and the band is pulled into the eclipse. There is an important moment right before that happens. As Guts reaches for him, Griffith has an internal reaction directed towards Guts. It is not a spoken warning to the entire band. He does not understand the full ritual yet, and he is not explaining an approaching eclipse that everyone else refuses to avoid. What the scene gives us is something more personal. At the lowest moment of Griffith's life, Guts is the last person he wants reaching him. This is the person whose departure broke the control Griffith thought he had over himself. Now Guts is running toward him, not as a subordinate waiting for instructions, but as someone strong enough to lift him, protect him, and decide what happens next. The person Griffith could never completely possess is about to witness how powerless he has become. Then the God Hand appears. And this is where the way Berserk's world functions becomes important. Causality does not usually operate like someone grabbing your body and physically forcing you to act. It arranges the road. The egg appears when its owner has reached unbearable despair. The God Hand enters at that moment when that person is vulnerable enough to accept something they may have rejected under ordinary conditions. Then they take the person's pain, desire, shame, and fear and arrange those emotions into an argument. With Griffith, they show him the mountain of bodies beneath his dream. People have already died following him. If he gives up now, the God Hand suggests that those deaths meant nothing. The castle is still ahead of him. The only way to keep walking is to step over the people who remain alive. That is manipulation. Serious manipulation. Griffith is tortured, trying to end it all, unable to speak, physically destroyed and trapped inside a supernatural ceremony controlled by beings who understand exactly what he wants. Any honest analysis has to acknowledge that. But manipulation is not the same as compulsion. The Count's refusal demonstrates the difference. When the Count is dying, the God Hand offers him continued life if he sacrifices his daughter Teresa. He is terrified of death. He has already become an apostle once, but he still can't offer his daughter, so he refuses, and the vortex takes him. The conditions are horrific, the choice is intentionally cruel, the scene shows that refusal remains possible. So yes, causality brought Griffith to the altar. The God Hand prepared the knife, Griffith still said yes. That does not mean he made the decision from a healthy state of mind. Obviously, he didn't. It means the circumstances explain his vulnerability without erasing his responsibility. The ritual also destroys another common argument, the idea that Griffith never cared about the Hawks. The sacrifice has to matter. The offering can't be emotionally meaningless to the person making it. The horror of the ritual is that the person must sever a bond connected to their humanity. So if the band of the Hawk truly meant nothing to Griffith, sacrificing them would carry no real weight. That doesn't mean he loved every member equally. It doesn't mean his love was healthy, generous, or free from possession. It means the band as a collective had become part of him. They carried his dream. They trusted his leadership. Their lives gave his ambition a shape larger than his own private desire. The manga shows that Griffith was capable of attachment long before the eclipse. After the fight with Zod, Guts asked why Griffith risked his life for him. Griffith responded by questioning whether he really needs a reason every time he puts himself in danger for Guts. Casca also tells Guts about the young soldier who died while following Griffith. The boy's demise visibly affected him. Griffith explains that the money he received from Genin allowed him to avoid sending more soldiers to their deaths, and while insisting that he is unaffected, he scratches his own arms until they bleed. That is not the behavior of someone who feels nothing. It looks more like someone trying to bury what he feels because fully confronting it would make continuing his dream more challenging. That is where I think people get Griffith backwards. They believe admitting that he cared somehow excuses him. It does the opposite. If Griffith sacrificed people who meant nothing to him, the eclipse would still be murder. The fact that he valued them makes it betrayal. He understood their loyalty. He knew what they had given him. They had spent a year as fugitives and then risked their lives to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. He used the bond that brought them back for him as the material for his transformation. Griffith's love does not save his moral character. It makes his decision morally possible and morally worse. And no, becoming Femto does not create a completely unrelated stranger who inherits Griffith's body while Griffith disappears from responsibility. Griffith is reborn as the fifth member of the God Hand, not as an ordinary apostle. The transformation changes him profoundly, but the story continues connecting Femto, the reborn Griffith, his dream, his history, and the consequences of his former relationships. The Count gives us another useful comparison here. He sacrificed his wife when he became an apostle, yet his attachment to his daughter remained powerful enough for him to refuse sacrificing her later. Becoming a monster does not prove that no human attachment never existed. Sometimes the attachment that remains is exactly where the monster fails. That matters when people argue that Femto assaulted Casca, so Griffith should not be blamed. The assault occurs after the sacrifice has already been accepted. The Hawks are already branded. Griffith is already transformed. Nothing about his ascension requires what he does to Casca. We can argue about the precise motive. Maybe it was about punishing Guts. Maybe it was control, humiliation, or a demonstration that his former attachments no longer governed him. The manga does not reduce the act to one confirmed explanation. It doesn't need to. What happened was deliberate. It was not required by the ritual. The God Hand did not order it as a piece of his transformation. That act belongs to Femto, and Femto is the being Griffith chose to become. Another defense says the Hawks were already willing to die for Griffith's dream. I don't think that survives much thought. A soldier accepting the possibility of death in battle is not consenting to being branded and offered as supernatural payment. The Hawks chose to fight beside Griffith. They did not give ownership of their bodies or their souls. Following someone into danger does not grant that person the right to decide that your life is now theirs to spend however they choose. That is why the eclipse is a betrayal instead of an unusually brutal military defeat. Then there is Falconia, and this is where the decision becomes uncomfortable, because Falconia genuinely protects people. Human beings threatened by the creatures of Fantasia find food, shelter, order, and safety inside the city. The apostles under Griffith fight on humanity's behalf instead of openly preying on them. To the ordinary citizen living behind those walls, Griffith looks like a savior. That benefit is real, but it does not erase how the world surrounding Falconia was created. During the battle with Ganishka, Skull Knight attempts to strike Femto with the sword of Behelets. Femto redirects the attack into Ganishka's transformed body. The result is the great wave of the astral world, which changes the physical world and brings legendary creatures into ordinary reality. Griffith becomes humanity's protector in a world he knowingly helped transform. That does not mean the people he saves are not truly saved. The shelter is very real. So is the fire outside it. Falconia can't retroactively repay the Hawks. Human lives are not numbers that can be subtracted in one arc and replaced with different lives later. Griffith can build something beautiful after committing evil. The beauty does not reverse what produced it, and I think that is the real argument. Griffith can be victimized and still become a victimizer. He can be manipulated without becoming mindless. He can care about people and still decide that his dream matters more than their lives. Those facts don't cancel one another. The God Hand did not create Griffith's desire for a kingdom. They found a desire that already existed, waited until every other part of his identity had become destroyed, and offered him a path where the desire could survive. The choice was arranged. It was also manipulated, yet it was still a choice. That is often how evil functions in Berserk. It does not always force someone to become the complete opposite of who they were. It takes what they already want and asks what they are willing to cut out of themselves to obtain it. The monster is built around a human desire. Griffith wanted his kingdom. The God Hand did not replace that dream. They gave him the opportunity to remove everything that competed with it. So the argument for Griffith should never be that he did nothing wrong. It should not be that causality made the choice for him. The count shows that refusal remains possible. It should not be that the Hawks meant nothing to him. The sacrifice only becomes meaningful because they did. It should not be that Femto is an unrelated creature carrying somebody else's guilt. The story maintains the connection between Griffith, Femto, and the reborn Hawk of Light. And Falconia can't settle the moral debt, because the people living safely there are not replacements for the people Griffith betrayed. Understanding Griffith does not require forgiving him. It requires seeing the entire person who reached that moment. Before he became a demon, Griffith contained ambition, shame, attachment, tenderness, pride, fear, and an almost life-ending dependence on his dream. The God Hand did not reach him while he was victorious. They reached him after torture had taken his body, guts had destabilized his identity, and the future had become something he could no longer endure. That explains why he was vulnerable. He does not make the decision innocent. Griffith was not empty because he was guilty. He cared about the Hawks. He sacrificed them anyway. And that is far darker than saying he was born without the ability to care. Griffith's tragedy is not that he had no humanity. It's that he had enough humanity for the sacrifice to count.